In the wake of their Pyrrhic victory at Fondor, covered in our last video, the New Republic scrambles to organize an effective defense against the Yuuzhan Vong threat, while the Yuuzhan Vong themselves begin to experience the seeds of discontent within their own ranks as they approach the edge of victory. Welcome to the Wizards and Warriors channel, where today we're continuing our exploration of the Yuuzhan Vong War in its second year, with the penetration of the core at Duro and the origins of a new Jedi purge. In the 2 months which followed the Battle of Fondor, the Yuuzhan Vong continued their blitz through the Outer and Mid Rim, running north to south, in what appears to be an attempt to cut off the all-important Corellian-run trade route. The recently fallen Gindain was one such important world along that run, with worlds like Druckenwell, Kalaba, and Rhodia falling to the Yuuzhan Vong along that vector. At Kalaba, the fleet of Twi'lek Brevet Admiral Glie Oleg crew, which included Jaina Solo and Rogue Squadron, came up against a Yuuzhan Vong force consisting of at least one Mid Roik. This battle, like many of this 2-month span, turned out to be an utter loss for the New Republic. The Yuuzhan Vong employed the Yogan's core tactic, pulling the moon of Kalaba into the planet and destroying it, the exact same way they had destroyed Cernpadel at the outset of the war, planning to use the destroyed planet as a new ship womb to grow yet more vessels. Crew's force took heavy losses in the fighting as well. Crew himself was killed when his flagship, the Bothan assault cruiser Champion, was destroyed, and Jaina Solo was grievously injured in the battle. Unable to rejoin Rogue Squadron while she recovered, Jaina went to join most of her family at Duro. Duro had been chosen to host refugees as part of the Senate Select Committee for Refugees, or Selkor, a group led by Kuwati Senator Vicky Shesh, but which Leia had been heavily involved in organizing. Leia, Han, and her twin brother Jason were already present upon her arrival, though working in separate areas. Jason was facing a crisis of identity, and in his time on Duro, gave up the use of the Force for fear of aggression drawing him to the dark side, especially after his role in the disaster of Fondor. Also present were Duros Admiral Darius Woot, responsible for organizing the planet's defense, and a Hutt defector named Randa Basadi Diori, child of Borga the Hutt, who led the faction of Hutts working to actively fight the Yuuzhan Vong invaders. The Duros refugee project was complicated by the planet's toxic environment. Millennia of pollution, compounded by a ruinous assault by General Grievous during the Clone Wars, had left the planet's surface all but uninhabitable. The Duros themselves mostly lived in city ships in the planet's orbit, but the refugee camps were established within domed settlements on the planet. Selkor organized efforts at environmental reclamation for the camps, with significant resource investment and assistance from the Duros shipping conglomerate Duro. On Coruscant, Luke Skywalker attended a meeting with Chief of State Bossk Leia and the rest of his advisory council, where they criticized his seeming inability to bring the Jedi to heel, especially given the involvement of Anakin and Jason Solo in the Centerpoint debacle causing the catastrophe at Fondor. After this meeting, Luke and Mara Jade Skywalker received even worse news from Jedi Master Trazina Lobi. Duro shipping seemed to be involved in shady dealings impacting the defense of Duro and the refugee assistance efforts. The Masters Skywalker and their youngest nephew Anakin Solo, who had been on Coruscant with his aunt and uncle, made way for Duro, where they hoped to investigate further. Other important information on Duro remained unknown to the Solos and Skywalkers. The Yuuzhan Vong had shown a growing interest in the troublesome Jedi, and many present on the planet hoped to exploit that. Randa the Hutt had therefore been in contact with his parent Borga, discussing the possibility of trading one of the Jedi present on the planet for the safety of Tatooine as a haven for the Hutts. Making matters even worse, Senator Vicky Shesh, who was a member of Bossk Leia's advisory council, in addition to her position leading Selkor, was a spy passing information directly to the Yuuzhan Vong. Jason and Jaina began having suspicions about her actions when interacting with her on Selkor business, though. She read to them as self-serving, and so they grew concerned about her control over Selkor's access to resources. She had been the person who had chosen Duro as the next refugee base as well, leading them to worry over the planet's potential fate. While the pair were discussing their dislike for her, Senator Shesh was in fact calling Yuuzhan Vong Warmaster Savong La, promising him forces had been recalled from Rhodia and Kubindi, and that the prep work the Yuuzhan Vong had asked for on Duro for an invasion was well underway. In exchange, Shesh was led to believe that Duro, at the edge of the core, would be the end of the Yuuzhan Vong conquests. The first phase of Yuuzhan Vong sabotage soon began to play out. Small biotes, which resembled Minox, a common pest, were unleashed within the dome of the settlement designated 32, which the creatures began to devour. This also happened to be the dome where Jaina, Han, Jacen and Randa were stationed. The group began evacuating the colony, distributing envirosuits and boarding refugees onto crawlers to head to the main settlement, called Gateway, where Leia was administering the whole project. Once there, the Yuuzhan Vong attempted to contact Randa the Hutt through a villain in order to arrange Jacen Solo's capture, but after realizing this meant the Yuuzhan Vong had agents within the camp already, Randa began to feel guilty about his betrayal. He reported evidence of a Yuuzhan Vong agent in the settlement, but the recipient of this report was none other than Senator Shesh. She immediately reported him to Savong La, dooming any attempt for further cooperation between the Hutts and Yuuzhan Vong. After a confrontation with Randa about the Vilip, Jaina and Mara Jade were able to track down Dr. Kriar and discovered he was in fact Nominor. He was responsible for the attack on 32, but on top of the efforts to sabotage the refugee biodomes, he hoped to capture the Jedi on the planet for War Master Savong La. Mara attempted to apprehend him, but the Executor was able to escape. Meanwhile, in one of the orbital cities, Jacen negotiated on behalf of the settlements with Kor-Juro representatives, at the same time as Anakin and Luke were present to investigate further into Kor-Juro's allegiances. Luke, Jacen and Anakin were able to confirm that Kor-Juro was directly collaborating with the Peace Brigade. Kor-Juro was also hoping to hold Jacen in place, while Savong La and his flagship, Sunalok, made way from the recently conquered planet Rhodia to Duro. The Juros had further been promised by Nominor that if they did not resist the Yuuzhan Vong invasion of the planet, their city ships would not be harmed. Mara and Luke were able to convince the Juros defense forces that Kor-Juro was not to be trusted, and Admiral Wood put the battle group on alert. Unfortunately, this battle group only consisted of New Republic Commodore Mabetai's ship, the MC-80 Posi, Juros defense platforms, and an assortment of the Juros Defense Forces starfighters. This paled in comparison to the mass of various Yuuzhan Vong warships which suddenly arrived in system, led by Savong La's Mid Roik flagship Sunalok. A massive worm-like creature called a Ichna was deployed in space, with Savong La warning that any resistance to a planetary invasion would lead to the Ichna devouring Juros city ships. Wood ordered all ships to stand down, agreeing to La's terms, and dropships then began to offload not just Yuuzhan Vong warriors, but 2 additional massive ground-based weaponized centipede-like creatures, Tuscad and Skauru. Jedi Master Kenth Hamner was called upon to bring a New Republic battle group as reinforcements, but the Advisory Council denied the request on the advice of Senator Shesh, who argued that no defensive fleets should be moved away from shipyard worlds. Leia was captured in the ground assault and taken captive in Gateway's administration center, which La had established as his own base of operations. Randa attempted to rescue Leia, perishing in the process. But soon Jacen appeared, having infiltrated the building while grappling with his vow to not draw on the Force, which he now weighed against the possibility that his mother would be killed if he did not. He chose to save his mother, fighting the War Master himself in single combat, lightsaber against Amphistaff. The young Jedi couldn't affect Savong La directly with the Force, but he was able to create a whirlwind of objects in the room, battering La and his forces hard enough for Jacen and Leia to escape. As fighting erupted in orbit, belying the lack of value in Yuuzhan Vong guarantees of safety, additional Dovin basals were deployed by the Yuuzhan Vong. They began crashing the orbital cities of Duros to the planet's surface, in a method similar to Yogan's core, destroying them all except for one, Urdorf, which successfully was able to pull away from the system at sublight speeds with its inhabitants. Anakin Solo, flying an X-Wing, was able to kill the Ichna harrying the Duros cities, but while Posi and Duros' defenses were attempting to engage the orbital forces, they were heavily outmatched, and the battle became unsalvageable. While the remaining New Republic forces withdrew, Savong La attended to the injury he had sustained in the duel with Jacen, a severed foot, which he planned to have ritually replaced with a new implant. From the administration building, where the Kor-Juro officials beseeched him to honor his word and spare the rest of the Juros, he transmitted a new pronouncement to the galaxy. The Yuuzhan Vong would cease their conquests where they were, and live alongside the galaxy's inhabitants in peace on the condition that every Jedi be sacrificed to them. More than any other Jedi, he announced his desire for Jacen Solo. Over the following 2 months, the Yuuzhan Vong held their position, while the galaxy began to turn on the Jedi. Many beings assisted the Peace Brigade in capturing or killing Jedi within New Republic space, hoping that the Yuuzhan Vong would be true to their word. This ignited tensions not just between the Jedi and the rest of the galaxy, but within the Order. Luke Skywalker argued that they needed to protect the most vulnerable Jedi while still protecting the civilians of the galaxy, while others, led by Kip Duron, favored a more aggressive response and felt less charitably about their responsibility to protect a galaxy which had turned on them. Luke asked the New Republic for a ship to evacuate the Jedi Academy on Yavin, which was protected only by the Jedi Masters Kam Solusar, Tion Solusar, and the cat-like Master Ikrit. But the New Republic was slow to act, and so he instead requested longtime Jedi ally and former smuggler Talon Karrde to extract the students. Anakin Solo, concerned for his childhood best friend Tahiri, who was still at the Praxeum, commandeered an X-Wing fighter and left for Yavin alone. Upon arrival, he found a Peace Brigade ship in orbit and hurried to the surface to warn about the impending invasion. The Solusars were waiting for Karrde to show up, but the Peace Brigade were likely to invade before he could arrive. A plan was put into motion to sail the students down a nearby river to a cave formerly inhabited by Master Ikrit, while Anakin and Ikrit stayed behind to distract the Peace Brigade and make them believe the students were still present in the temple. The Peace Brigade force landed under the command of Lieutenant Kot Murno, who informed Anakin they would be taking command of the Praxeum. Anakin challenged the Peace Brigade to come and get him and fired upon them. Tahiri had secretly remained behind with 2 other students and began assisting Anakin in the firefight. This presented a significant problem. The plan had been for Anakin and Ikrit to escape the temple in Anakin's X-Wing, but now they wouldn't all be able to fit. Anakin and Tahiri managed to capture one of the Peace Brigade's light shuttles. As they were trying to leave, Master Ikrit jumped from the shuttle to provide cover by grabbing chasing ships with the Force. The Peace Brigade managed to return fire, killing Ikrit and prompting Tahiri to jump out after the slain Master. Before any attempt could be made to rescue her, the shuttle was shot down, plunging into the jungle. Meanwhile, in orbit, Talon Karrde finally arrived aboard the Wildcard. Karrde hoped to link up with the Jedi as quickly as possible, so he contacted the Peace Brigade's force leader, a former Imperial named Captain Imsatad, with an offer of alliance. Imsatad was won over by Karrde's offer of 2 types of creatures to help in the search. A creature able to project a bubble which prevented the use of the Force, called a Isalamiri, and wolf-like creatures called Vornskir, which hunted using the Force, making them highly effective Jedi hunters. Once they had located the Jedi, Karrde betrayed Imsatad, forcing his group to retreat to orbit, and he began coordinating with the Masters Solusar for the evacuation. While Karrde and the Solusars were evacuating the children, a Yuuzhan Vong fleet appeared. It consisted of 2 Mid Roik capital ships under the command of Zak Vuta. Vuta informed the Peace Brigade members that their help was no longer required and destroyed their remaining ships, taking over operations and establishing a base camp on the ground, while entering a standoff against Karrde's small picket force. Back on Yavin, Tahiri had been captured and given over to the Yuuzhan Vong Shapers. The Shapers began experimenting on her, attempting to implant a new Yuuzhan Vong persona into her brain. Anakin attempted to mount a rescue of Tahiri. While heading for the Yuuzhan Vong encampment, Anakin met an unexpected ally, a Yuuzhan Vong named Vua Rapung. Rapung was a former member of the warrior caste, who had been pushed to the lowest caste of Yuuzhan Vong society called the Shamed Ones. This caste was reserved for those believed to have lost favor with the gods. In many cases, as with Rapung, this was the result of the body's rejection of ritual scars and body modifications, like implanting new organs or limbs. Rapung correctly suspected he had not lost the god's favor, but instead had been sabotaged by the Shaper currently working on Tahiri's reshaping, Mjan Quad, his former lover. Jedi and Yuuzhan Vong infiltrated the encampment, where Anakin posed as a slave and learned much about Yuuzhan Vong society and technology. This included the acquisition of a type of crystal called a lambent, which he used to power his lightsaber, and to his shock, attuning with it gave him the ability to sense the Yuuzhan Vong. Moreover, other shamed Yuuzhan Vong in the camp talked about the Jedi as their potential saviors. After confronting Quad, she admitted her work in sabotaging Rapung. While this technically removed his shamed status to all the warriors who heard, he still challenged any warrior who would threaten Anakin and the newly rescued Tahiri. Tahiri's shaping had not been complete, but had given her a basic ability to pilot Yuuzhan Vong ships. So while Rapung threw himself into the crowd of warriors, sacrificing himself for the Jedi, to the surprise of the warriors and the awe of the onlooking Shamed Ones, the pair of Jedi students escaped in Quad's shuttle. They returned to Sana and Valin, transferred to their now repaired shuttle, and began to make their exit. Kam Solusar, in orbit on Karrde's ship, informed Karrde of Anakin's escape. The battle which ensued was going strongly in the Yuuzhan Vong's favor, but the timely arrival of another old smuggler friend of Card quickly changed this. This new arrival was Booster Terek, who Master Skywalker had told Jaina and Jason to seek out, and who commanded one of the only privately owned star destroyers in the galaxy. The day-long battle took a heavy toll on Card's force. Nonetheless, Anakin and his group were recovered, and all of the Jedi were evacuated. While technically in a moment of claimed detente between the New Republic and the Yuuzhan Vong, the Battle of Yavin would have far-reaching consequences. The understanding passed between the Jedi and the Yuuzhan Vong through Anakin and Rapung's alliance would open new possibilities in the war, as would Tahiri's newly implanted understanding of Vong society and technology. But the war was far from over, and the threat to the Jedi would only get more dire as the Yuuzhan Vong unleashed a new horrific weapon on the unsuspecting Order. That will be covered in our next episode, as the Vong conquest continues to sweep across the galaxy star by star. Please consider liking, subscribing, and clicking the bell to be notified when that and other videos on the Wizards and Warriors channel are released. These videos would also be impossible without the support of our patrons and channel members here on YouTube. You can follow the links in the description to join them and get early access to videos, our Discord, a release schedule, and other benefits.